You're listening to the Perth Property Show, Australia's only weekly property podcast by West Australian experts for West Australian listeners. Catch your latest episode every Monday at 7 a.m.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Perth Property Show. My name's Trent Fleskens, your host. This week, we've got another massive hitter in the industry. He literally shapes the city we live in. It is Col Dutton, GM of WA Residential, Stockland. Big company, big position, a lot of responsibility, Col. Thank you for coming in.
Mate, thanks for that introduction. That sounds good.
Not only are you the GM, you're also president of UDIA. We had Tanya Steinbeck, the CEO of UDIA WA, in a couple of months ago. I guess you interface with her quite a lot, and as president, there's a lot of work you do around helping people understand the development space, a lot of advocacy in property development as well with the government. Does that keep you busy too?
Yeah, definitely, but well supported by Tanya and her team. And also there's a UDA council that was involved, and also a whole committee structure of membership that actually feeds into that. So it's a really good organisation. The mix of membership is from right across the board, including government, in regard to the UDA. It's a good purpose and a good structure to help advocate and help lead our industry.
I'm a big fan of the organisation, and you spend a lot of time as well, given Stockland doesn't just do land development, they also own a lot of assets, shopping centres, things like that, with the Property Council of Australia as well.
Yeah, so we're involved in the Property Council as well, not me personally, but certainly Stockland's a diversified property company, and the PCA is probably a bit of a broader church that is involved in industrial, commercial property such as retail, office buildings, logistics. UDA is probably more focused on the residential and front-end planning side of things. So between those two, we've got really good presence here in WA.
We will spend a lot of time talking about Stockland, talking about land development, talking about the planning system, ways to solve our housing shortage crisis in Western Australia. But first, as we do with our big hitters, we talk about you.
Yep.
We go right back to when you were a little nipper over on the other side of the country. You're a Queenslander, another Queenslander in Western Australia, shaping West Australian property.
Yeah. I came to WA about 11 years ago, but certainly I grew up in Brisbane in the 60s and 70s and moved to the Gold Coast in the 90s.
What was the Gold Coast like in the 90s compared to now?
Fairly similar, obviously not as many coastal high-rises, but certainly and a high growth. I worked actually in the Gold Coast Council there for about 5 years in a development assessment, and it was the highest growth rate in Australia at the time. And the corridor between Brisbane and Gold Coast was full on, going flat out.
Still is these days, isn't
it?
Yeah.
It's certainly more, I suppose, concentrated. A lot of the Gold Coast is filled up, if you like, from a land and house perspective. But certainly the coastal strip is I was over there last week actually, the coastal strip is continuing to have an enormous amount of development. And
look, I want to talk about you personally. Let's not forget to go back to that. But isn't it interesting to see the dichotomy, the Gold Coast with your 20, 30, 40-storey apartment buildings and the strip between that and Brisbane. And then you see Halls Head, 2 stories, 1.5, 2 stories. Scarborough, you've got Rendezvous and Beach Shack now. What's the difference culturally? Why do we have such a different cultural opinion on height here in Western Australia, especially when it comes to our best views being next to the ocean?
Yeah, actually, when I first landed in Perth, trying to work out where I was going to live, the first thing that struck, besides the natural beauty of Perth, like the waterways, the open space, the beaches, the first thing that struck me really was the suburban feel to it. I ended up living in City Beach and Wembley Downs, but it felt like the city had grown up off the river, and it became more and more suburban as you headed towards the beach. And it was kind of the opposite to my life on the Gold Coast, where I was living in a 400 square metre block right near the beach, and all the activity was around the beach. And I realised the Gold Coast is different weather-wise and climate-wise, but certainly just felt the immediate impact from a property person. It felt the underlay, if you like, felt very suburban when I first arrived.
Look, we've had years since, and still it seems like that culture is still very anti-height. I feel like a lot of our housing supply problems could have been fixed if we just did away with height restrictions decades ago and allowed supply to move where demand is and provide as many West Australians as possible with some of the best views in the world. Instead, we're in the situation we're in now.
I remember when I first landed, actually, I went to the museum with my kids, and it was in the surveying section. And I remember it saying there was a section there in the museum that said Perth isn't like the terrace housing of Sydney and Melbourne. We're more suburban, and we're really proud of that. And at that time, I thought, oh, this is going to be interesting, like entering the market over here, but felt it more and more as I've gone along. But certainly, I think we're on the journey now in regard to understanding how important it is to be able to develop around nodes and around areas with transport linkages and everything else.
Let's get you back to the Gold Coast.
Okay.
How old were you there when you moved to the Gold Coast?
20, yeah.
And what were you doing?
I actually dropped out of uni about a year or so in. Wanted to be a rugby league star. I want to be, if you know Mel Meninga, he's an Australian coach. I wanted to be his centre partner.
Were you any good?
No, not good enough. But I played after school for a few years. I think I got injured and then went back into uni part-time. So I went back in, I was doing engineering, and I went back in part-time as a technician sort of thing, associate diploma, and then continued on with the degree. So I was studying part-time and working for Brisbane City Council actually in an engineering role I studied for 9 years part-time. So it was all a bit full on.
And what was the focus? Built form engineering?
No, civil. So it was construction maintenance. I got to basically work in every depot around Brisbane and bridges and drainage and roads and all that.
Well, it gets you around.
I enjoyed it, actually. I really enjoyed the engineering side of it. I actually popped out of Brisbane Council and went to the state government for a little bit as a coastal engineer. I lived by the coast and I really enjoyed the difference in that. But I quickly found out it didn't quite fit me in regard to it was too kind of slow moving and research sort of orientated than what I thought it was going to be.
Yep.
So I went back into Brisbane City Council in a development assessment role. And that's where I kind of went, ooh, what I've been missing out on. That's where it kind of tweaked my want for...
I guess much more dynamic, more interesting. Projects, numbers, architecture, all these stuff starts to come up. Can I digress again? How does that Brisbane development assessment environment differ to what we experience here in Western Australia?
Yeah, no, Brisbane's been one council, one city. We've got 32 here in Perth, I think it is. Been one city for almost 100 years.
So hang on, let's just make that clear. Instead of 30 cities, which Perth has, it's one council.
Yep. It's been like that, like I think it's 1924, something like that. But certainly it works. It certainly works, and it's good quality decision makers. Over here in Perth, a lot of the state government gets involved in a lot of decisions as they need to.
Well, it has to, right?
Has to.
Should it have to?
I think to get a consistent approach in the framework that we have, it's the only way it can happen appropriately. Yep. Brisbane takes on more responsibility from a planning. It obviously still sits under the state government's framework, but certainly takes on a lot more responsibility in setting a future for Brisbane. It's not like everything becomes homogeneous. They actually really value the different villages that Brisbane were and how it pulls out those planning requirements within the villages. But it's certainly been hugely successful. The livability of Brisbane and the way they've progressed over the last probably 20 or 30 years is renowned across the planning world.
Obviously, from a geographical perspective, a lot easier to pull people from Sydney and Melbourne where most of the population is to get them up there. But I look at it and go, well, geez, you've got a lot more efficiency, it seems, in getting things done, a lot less of an issue with height and with large format developments if demand requires it, because supply never happens unless there's demand. Let's be frank about that. And you've also got the Olympics in Brisbane happening 10 years from now too, right? So that it seems like Brisbane is heading towards the same crescendo that Sydney did back in the year 2000. Had a big hangover Sydney after that for about a decade, but geez, the decade before that was an exciting time.
Yeah,
you're in Western Australia. Are you still happy here?
Yeah, no, I'm fortunate enough to get around the other states through my Stockland hat, and certainly Brisbane have got a buzz going on at the moment in regard to the Olympics, and we're still 10 years out. So, and there will be a really coordinated approach to that infrastructure, and there'll be a legacy left similar to Sydney in regard to the infrastructure and provisions for the Olympics. So it's an exciting time, and it is easier in regard to the population transfer up going north.
How did you get out of the government?
I actually worked for Tweed Council, which was a kind of urban rural just over the border in New South Wales, and then I took a job. There was a super council created on the Gold Coast. They called it a super council back in 1995. I worked there for 5 years again in all the hustle and bustle of a growth corridor. I looked after all the land and environmental approvals. So I was right into it. But I met Stockland. I was president of a surf club over there, and I met Stockland. They were sponsoring our surf boat. So I got to meet the guys in Stockland at the time.
And they were doing a land development around
Yeah,
they're
doing a big one, Pacific Pines it was called, on the northern Gold Coast. I came on board as a project director of that one project. And over the next 5 years or so, we went and bought probably another 5 projects. And I was the first employee on the Gold Coast of Stockland. And we ended up with about a team of 30 as we bought projects.
So you essentially built a team under you.
Yeah.
It's pretty exciting.
It was really good, actually. kind of going from government is a really important part, as it is, all the development assessment stuff, but certainly having a great team, building a team and picking your own team. And I picked a number of government people and everything else, but certainly that was a really good experience, jumping into the whole spectrum of what is property, from understanding the customers and the catchment all the way through to the right product and marketing and selling and communities.
So how old were you at this point in time?
About 40.
So most of your career up to that point was government, working in various levels of government, and then you've transitioned into Stockland in your 30s to then head up a regional team, essentially.
Yeah. So I looked after, I was at Stockland for in Queensland for about 10 years. So I've been with Stockland 21 years, 10 years in Gold Coast, and I was part of the Queensland leadership. I also looked after North Queensland there for a while as well. Certainly that whole experience, and Queensland through the 2000s, had a real surge in regard to, there was a big migration or interstate migration from Victoria into Queensland in the mid-2000s, and that really, it really had a real surge.
Well, it makes a big impact on the viability and the success of a company like Stockland, because you don't sell land, you don't sell apartments, you don't develop and hold shopping centres, which sit on land, obviously, without people to buy these products, right?
Yeah.
Otherwise, you're a pretty useless company, aren't you?
Yeah, and we definitely follow population. Economy and population sets the market. Understanding the different states and regions is all part of it, trying to get a feel, all that data and how you make sense of it. Join the dots, if you like, to actually make the right decisions.
How'd you get convinced to come across to the lonely city of Perth?
I suppose I was just looking, and I was pretty entrenched in the Gold Coast.
It doesn't sound like you had many reasons to leave at the time.
I wanted more in a leadership position, and I wanted to learn more. And I thought it was a fairly big call, particularly bringing a family over, young kids, starting a new city where I didn't really know anyone. We'd just bought a couple of projects in the Northeast Corridor, Vale and Whiteman. Basically, the volume of the business, as in sales, was going to double, and the team was going to be similar in size. I think I was confident because I'd done a similar thing with the Gold Coast team, but I was coming into an existing team over here.
Their own processes, their own culture.
Yeah.
And the systems, planning environment you have to relearn.
Yeah. No, and that's, I enjoy learning. I continue to enjoy learning and, having a go at
You still learning?
different things. Oh, definitely. And not just mechanics and processes or whatever, but certainly in regard to leadership and teams and staying on the ball and trying to understand, the housing supply or the housing discussion at the moment. It's morphing quite quickly, I think. And that's a learning space. I think we as an industry need to learn and help influence it.
It's so dynamic at the moment. Before we move off to Stockland, I would like to have, a more direct question to you. Start to think about the 20-year-old, the 25-year-old in a junior planning or valuations or development management position. What are the critical steps to getting to the top of your game, getting into the top of the game in Western Australia when it comes to property development? For Nathan, it was loyalty to his company, it was delivering.
For me, the purpose of Stockland, the purpose is a big word, and I think it just aligned with what I felt good about, creating things, being part of a team, being empowered to make decisions and getting on with it. So it felt right. Obviously, I was very statutory planning, sort of development assessment focused prior to that, and it's a really important part. But the wider industry and understanding how it all fits together. I remember when I was a few weeks in, having joined Stockland, I remember sitting out in the project with all these big yellow trucks moving, and it felt like a little boy again.
Yeah, overwhelming. It
was like,
what have I got into?
Yeah, it was like I was a little, 7-year-old under the mango tree doing matchbox cars, creating cities, which I used to do.
Yeah.
So it was just at a bigger scale. So it was like, to me, keep an eye out for your passion. Make sure you're on purpose or who you work for aligns with your purpose. And I think Stockland, that kind of clicked with me from day one. Well, a few weeks in, I thought, yep, I made the right decision here and kept going.
So the quicker you can align your work with what you feel your purpose is, it makes life and work a lot easier and makes succeeding a lot easier.
I think it's self-awareness as well. Like, make sure when you feel passionate about something, make sure you voice it and you identify it. And be genuine. For me, you don't try and be something you're not. Work out where you're heading personally and also how to lead properly.
Well, also, I think you still have to deliver. At the end of the day, you didn't just go from working in Brisbane Council and one day you were leading a massive team at Stockland or leading a state division at Stockland. You had to deliver on projects in between as well.
Yeah, you got to be results orientated.
Make your boss money.
Well, definitely. To me, there's kind of three parts to it. There's the delivering, the results orientated, make sure you do that appropriately. the stakeholder stuff, both internally within the company, but also externally with the politicians, departments, state government departments and others. And then there's the people sort of leadership part. Make sure you're concentrating on making sure you've got a good team and got the right people and you're leading them.
So what's your day-to-day? What does the day-to-day look like for the GM of Stockland WA?
There's probably 3 phases to it. There's very much an operational phase in regard to the projects that you have operational, ones you're about to launch, and the longer-term ones, the pipeline ones that you're trying to get ready for the next few years.
So making sure your projects are ticking along every day?
Yeah,
Putting
definitely.
out fires?
We very much focus on ownership at the project level. So hopefully the likes of me are just tapping them along in the right direction rather than putting out too many fires.
Yourself,
but,
yeah.
Yeah, you kind of dive in and dive out. But certainly that's, to me, the beauty of our structure is I have a kind of a leadership group that I heavily rely on. But all at the project level, we have the development managers, the project managers, the marketing, the sales, the community relations people that really drive the project. And that's where you win and lose at the project level. So it's that, and also I suppose buying into the future, more strategic view of where you buy, what types of products will go into that project is constant. Product continues to change and evolve, and staying in front of that.
So that's the first phase of your day?
Yep. There's a wider Stockland focus and strategy in regard to where Stockland's heading, and I'm the state GM. My responsibility is to make sure, I understand it and contribute and influence, but also make sure my team gets a legible read on that and feel part of something bigger. So that interstate, if you like, interaction, and I'm involved in one particular group with all the development managers across Australia with the leadership team to make sure we have we understand it consistently, the way we do business, and head up that team and chair that team to actually continue to have an excellent operational phase, but also look for innovation as well. So that's my second one, and probably
so driving the vision. Is that what you summarise?
Driving the vision, but also it's at a very operational level, if you like, in regard to getting a consistent approach and making sure we learn off each other rather than just having pockets of brilliance in different states. How do we actually pull that around the other states? And then the third one's probably the UDA stuff at the moment, going into my 4th year in UDA. And it is, to me, a bit of a, if you like, I know it intersects with work, but it's a bit of a community give in regard to how do we continue to improve and make things better for the industry and, in the end, for the results of creating communities or within communities. So it's really valuable.
Well, there you go. Everyone listening can get an understanding of what Col Dutton's day looks like. Let's move into Stockland itself. Let's talk about the projects you guys are doing. Let's talk about land development. Let's talk. I want to focus on that, I think, more so than the asset management side of things, because it's way less interesting to me. But look, you've got some big communities. You've had them pushing for obviously quite a few years now. You talked about when you jumped into WA, you were dealing with Whiteman's Edge and Vale. How has that progressed over time? You're in Haynes, you're up near Alkimos. It looks like in every fringe land development, Stockland is a part of it.
Yeah, definitely. And Perth, if you look across, there's about probably 24 or 25 corridors in Australia that we focus on, and it's really, like I said before, following the people. Perth has 4 growth corridors and then the central area. So I suppose over the last 10 years, and we continue to have projects in each of the corridors, the diagonals of the compass, if you like, northeast, northwest, etc. So that's been our greenfield. And I think we've been fortunate enough to be able to buy large projects where you actually set the way forward through the master planning and also create identity of projects. So that's a great thing about Stockland, be able to do that with its capital and its capital strength.
These projects are generational, right? It's not something where you start it this week and then in 2 years' time you're cashing out. These are 10, 20-year projects, right?
Yeah, 100%. And it's a long game.
Yeah, it's hard to get staff to buy into things that they may not be seeing through to the end.
No, and part of the way to do it is ensure that the team aren't just relating to a single project. They're
stage-based.
Yeah, but also they relate to the way you're doing things across the board. So it's definitely gone from, and we've got 5 active projects at the moment. Our latest, I suppose, launch from a couple of years ago was Canopy, which it's a green tidal, medium density sort of project at Glendalough.
That's the one that I'm most excited with. I would love to talk to you about that because it really talks to where I think Stockland as a company should be going, like every other land developer. You're starting to build some real competencies. Canopy is a big urban infill project. It's $77 million project. You're providing only 97 lots compared to the 2,500 that Amberton Beach provides. So I know it's a lot more niche. It's harder to scale for you guys. It's harder to acquire. It's more expensive to acquire in ways. There's certainly per lot, but you feel like you cut your teeth on that. Is it a successful project? Is it one that you guys want to do more of?
Oh, definitely. Yes, it is a successful project. It's going through the teeth of the construction hump of the moment, trying to get through finishing it. Certainly it's sold very well and we bought well, and it's an example of things we want to do in the future. We've actually got another one close to an announcement as well, which is probably double the size of Canopy.
That's an infill?
Infill.
Fantastic. A general region you can maybe give us a little bit of insight into?
South of the river.
Fantastic. Yeah, good. All right.
But certainly they're exciting projects, and Canopy from day one, going through all the acquisition assumptions and the stakeholder engagement, Sterling in the end were excellent in regard to, I think they got what we were going to do. I think the owners, who were the Little Sisters of the Poor, which owned I think it's aged care next door, they basically sold off half their site to fund the new development. But certainly it's really good when you buy well and you've got a good reason, a good strategy in regard to the project. We bought it off market. I think it had been on market previously, and people were focusing on an apartment outcome. We thought its location within the community, adjacent to Lake Munga, the retail, train station 600 metres down the road, just made sense that a lower density, but 2 and 3 story product and 2 and 3, 4 bedroom product would just work. It sat right between Mount Hawthorn and Wembley, and Glendalough, had a bit of a mixed reputation, I suppose, because of a different product in there.
Good way of saying pretty of a negative reputation. It's old flat central, right? Because the old BGC flats through Glendalough, and they were pretty low socioeconomic, which stands out like dog's balls, really, because you look at the rest of the suburbs around there. You've mentioned them, Mount Hawthorn, you've got Wembley, West Leederville. These are pretty affluent suburbs, and then you've just got this stain on the area, and what you've done there is you're rejuvenating it, bringing a brand new segment into the market.
Yeah, and it was big enough to do that. 2.7 hectares, 97 terrace housing and other. But also Glendalough, like you said, I think half the product in Glendalough is either flats or old flats or whatever. But certainly the location of Glendalough, we were confident. Part of the problem is we were trying to price our new product. There was nothing...
You can't compare. You become a price maker rather than a price taker.
That was the nervous part of it. But
sold
we're
well.
Really happy. Yeah, it's all but sold the first 3 stages, and we've got a 4th stage coming up.
Well, look, people can drive past and see it. You can't miss it, right? It's quite a bulk of seeing all these townhouses running through off its power street. Yeah. And you really, if anyone listening, you want to see this development from Stockland, I highly recommend having a drive past and a drive through.
Yeah.
It reminds me a little bit of the Perry Lakes development that was done in Florida a few years ago. Just providing that median density townhouse, missing middle, they call it, to the inner ring of Perth.
Yeah, and that's what I touched on before about Perth being so suburban. There's not many opportunities, and I think the latest census even showed that Perth's got the lowest growth of townhouse type product compared to the other states.
Is that because we're still stuck with single story land developments 40 k's from Perth?
Well, I think that's out of necessity in regard to, and people call it sprawl. Perth has some of the best greenfield. Sprawl kind of, for me, means it's disorganised, and it's actually, Perth has some of the best developers and builders in Australia, and some of the best examples of actually doing density well, providing product choice within those master plan communities. So to me, if we can reflect some of the great work we're doing in the greenfields and bring it to the central region and the infill, the missing middle, that's, I suppose, what part of our philosophy is.
Well, that's what I'd love to see Stockland do, right? You've clearly got fantastic capabilities, as well as your competitors. There's fantastic capabilities in master planning communities, in providing good product, in delivering projects and not going broke. It takes a real company to be there decades later and still provide this. I just wish you guys would do it a little closer to the city, not on the fringes, not pushing out that next kilometre of services, sewerage, piping, the next school, the next police station, all that taxpayer money. When wouldn't you prefer coming from the Gold Coast to see a Perth that looked a little more like Brisbane or the Gold Coast and a little less like definitely. The most sprawled city in the world?
Yeah, definitely. And it's a state government's strategy. It's ours as well. So it's how you get that opportunity, like in the greenfield locations, we're the master planner, if you like, and we don't have any ratepayers around us. We actually set it up well, the retail, the central, the schools. And when we sell it, we tell people where things are going to be. I suppose it's more difficult in the infill areas because you have to deal with how do you fit it in appropriately in an existing community.
That is the issue, and the system is set up to make it so much easier to deliver housing solutions, which is why the building grants were the solutions 2 years ago in greenfields locations, because you can just get on, roll through a few hectares and provide supply as fast as possible. Whereas that is inherently the issue with West Australia's planning system, in that it prejudices so far against infill, which is the proper solution, I think, to our problems, that it's just easier to band-aid it again with another estate, create another train station further down the line past Byford.
Yeah, I think you need both. I think you need choice. Not everyone can afford, and Perth is the most affordable at this point in time of all the capital cities, all the main capital cities. I think you need a choice of both. Housing choice within the community and housing choice within the newer communities are really what we should be focusing on. You need that choice. The state governments, and not just the existing state government, in the past have really provided good support to first home buyers through the Key Start loans and everything else. I'd hate to think where we'd be today if we hadn't had that support in the past.
There is a clear connection between the existence of first homeowner grants for new builds, the Key Start product, which essentially facilitates the financing of most of these land estates as a basis, and the success of some of the biggest builders in this state and some of the biggest land developers. Without the first homeowners grant and Key Start facilitating this, you're right, we wouldn't have Byford, we wouldn't have Alkmaar, we wouldn't have Ellenbrook, these situations. But I also then would play devil's advocate and wonder, well, what would we have? Would it have forced us towards more density, more height, rather than the easier solution of the master planned estate?
Yeah, and I think the infill and the missing middle, if you like, in regard to providing the likes of canopy around the place is a difficult one to do, just because I mentioned the suburban underlay, if you like, how you manage the front end of all that, how you get the approvals, how you get the purchase and the approvals at the front end. And I think the complexity is in Perth that the interaction at the local authority level or the city level is less than ideal, as we know.
Yeah, well, let's segue into it. Let's talk about how do we, we've spoken a little bit about Stockland, but let's talk about how to make Stockland's job a little easier, because you are one of the biggest proponents. If we had a few weapons or a few tools in our belt, a few bullets in the gun on how to actually fix this problem, you'd be going straight to your big developers to be able to solve this housing problem. What would make your life easier to solve this problem? Yeah,
I think the number one thing, and first of all, I have to acknowledge the existing, the Premier, but also the two existing ministers involved. Rita Saffioti and John Kerry are excellent. They've got
they get things done.
Intent. They got the strategic outlook, and besides housing, it's also the coordination of infrastructure around it and how we do that. For me, the issue is in how do you get the front end in a timely fashion and actually execute. So it's about how do we actually corral smarts of industry and government to actually have a more timely and certain outcome through the front end of planning, and obviously the approvals through the various state government departments as well.
So it's not super hard for you to acquire the land, I assume. It's not a big problem. You're solving those problems. You have been for decades. It is what it is. That's a commercial environment. But once you get past that, it's how long does it take to actually make these purchases commercial and bring product to the world?
Or the assumptions you're making prior to purchase.
How do we tighten those up?
Yeah, how do you make the timeliness and the outcomes and the assumptions that the likes of Stockland make, how do you make them more efficient and legible through the system? How do we coordinate the various parts of government to have a reasonable, relevant outcome quickly?
Well, tell us.
Well, to me, and again, Rita Saffioti's onto it, and she announced a few weeks ago regarding having a referral coordination. So that, to me, is a structural innovation to help decision makers come to a timely outcome. But to me, it's also cultural. Cultural doesn't cost a cent if you get it right. So to me, it's how do we actually make, and I was a statutory
you've been
planner.
there. Yeah.
So how do you actually make the people involved in this feel part of something bigger? Because we are.
This is amazing, Col. I cannot believe you just said that. Last week, Ross Manette was on here talking about how do we get planners in a local government area to feel like they're on the same team as the developer, moving towards the same outcome, rather than being a gatekeeper, stopping people walk through the gate because there's somehow some misalignment between goals. How do we get the goals of the local government planners to be the same as the goals of the developers?
Yep.
We shape it in the right way, but we're all, the second that application is lodged, we're all part of the same team.
I know it sounds
Why do we have to talk about this?
mystical, but it is. Like, we all are either creating new communities on the fringes, like you said, or we're actually creating within existing communities and trying to improve those existing communities. Why can't we all have that? That's my purpose. I'm part of that.
Oh, you're right. It's a cultural thing, right?
Yep.
Because look, you come up through that system yourself. Whether you're a planner working in local government or a planner working for a consulting firm or you're a developer, everyone would have gone through university super excited about helping to build communities. However, somehow the culture has changed over time where the people who work in development and in consulting, they've still got that passion, they're still excited about it, but the people in local government on the planning side seem to have either lost that or are too scared to make decisions, are too scared to be brave about getting outcomes. There are just as many good as there are frustrating, I think, because of who's paying the bills, and that's the council. And most councils, especially in an urban infill situation, are not too progressive when it comes to providing more housing supply. Not in my backyard, thank you.
Yeah. And I think frustration is probably the number one emotion that comes to me. I know the government, the community, the likes of us, the developers, we can do better. That's the bit that frustrates me the most. We can actually set a better path, but it comes down to individuals and their leaders and the leaders themselves, including me, to actually help mould that. And I think it's a never-ending. I think the UDA, for example, I think it's 50 years this year in WA. It's a constant grind, and surely we can change it.
How long does it take? Let's just put it on the table here. Let's say you've just bought 30 hectares somewhere, right? It's enough to create a bit of a suburb, get things moving at least. From the day that you paid that first deposit, how long would it take to break dirt and start putting down your first services?
Yeah, depends on the issues on the piece of dirt and what you've bought it on, but I'll easily say it'd be at least 4 or 5 years.
People will be shaking their heads right now at that.
Yeah. And
what's most of that time frame made up of?
It's definitely the front end planning and coordination of the higher order approvals. I think all the way through we have our own commercial lens on it in regard to have we got this right? Who are the customers we identify the various suburbs across Perth who's going to come to this particular project. So we're doing a lot of work in the background identifying who we think the customer to be. We're doing a lot of work in regard to delivering product and a diversity and choice of product within those. So there's a lot of commercial considerations going on, but definitely the most frustrating is the time, I think. The time and also a legible, reasonable approach. And that's what I'm saying, we can do better. I think I learnt jumping from government into property that they're only one small part of it, but a really important part of it that can actually delay and lose money because of the delay and the lack of legibility in regard to decision making. That's
right. Yeah, well, time is money, and lack of efficiency is money, risk is money, all those things. And what it does is we need to make it clear, because it's such an efficient market, whilst all companies would try and make the largest profit as possible, it's not the most fantastic return on equity a lot of the time being in land development. You make what you can to move on to the next project a lot of the times. But the one thing that would help bring down cost of land is time, right? Because time is money.
100%.
The interest costs, IRR, if you could half the time on planning, you could take an extra 10% off the cost because you could move on to the next project. You wouldn't be building in the millions of dollars in interest or cost of capital to get. That's a fact. We've talked about local government, but I also want to talk about stakeholders outside of local government. Perfect example, and I'm a 100th in size of the development that you guys do, Col. But we've got a couple of hectare infill development in the city of Mandurah. It's the last block left essentially in the suburb. We don't even need a transformer to deliver power, although it was an option we looked at. But we've moved away from looking at that option because, one, it takes 300 days to get a transformer into this state right now, just to power the 36 lots we're developing. But two, just to get an approval on the plan we've got, it will take 6 months. So what we're doing, I know a number of developers are in the same position, we're going to spend the next 4 months completing the development of this site. I'm probably going to sit there waiting for 2 months longer to get approval for the development we just built.
Yep.
Isn't that insane?
Yeah. The whole construction hump of activity, for want of a better word, at the moment is impacting us all. And I think, if nothing else, we should learn from the last couple of years and have a more coordinated approach to both infrastructure and housing, if you like, for a broader housing term, in regard to how do we approach it. And the example you gave is one of those, the Western Power transformer. We need to make sure that we've got more foresight in regard to the way we coordinate our infrastructure and have enough float, if you like, in regard to providing it. The last couple of years, you talk about learning before. There's a lot of learning to go on from the last couple of years.
Well, let's look at, again, cost to delivery. A big part of developments these days, and has been for the last 30 or 40 years, is the way that we provide flat blocks. How do you provide a flat block? You provide limestone retaining. And who has bought every single block in Western Australia right now? It's the state government with Metronet. What that's done is pretty much double the cost of retaining and sand in Western Australia. That must make delivery of your products more expensive.
Yeah, it's certainly the infrastructure spend has dwarfed the land, if you like, land development or lot development spend, and that intersection, and that's a good example, the limestone blocks, is the choke point at the moment just because of supply. So it's a local supply, throw in all the builder supply issues, which is more national and international. That one limestone is a local choke, if you like, in regard to getting on with land development to provide for the housing. So it's things like that. How do we have a more coordinated approach to that, or alternate materials, and quickly allow alternate materials to make up the gap, if you like?
All it's leading to, I think, is a generational change, just like we had 10, 15 years ago. This is going to be the new cost to deliver property, to deliver land, to deliver apartments, townhouses. We've hit a new norm, just like we did back in 2010 when a 4x2 could be turnkey built for 150. Now it's 350. It's insane to think, Col. But what that does in any asset class, when the replacement cost increases, the natural value of that asset generally increases as well. Housing is just going to get more and more expensive, isn't it, over the years?
I do think we're going through a real peak in cost of housing, for example, at the moment. Like looking across states, we in the last 2 years have been in the mid 40% in house construction increase over the 2 years, whereas interstate it's been like low 20%. And I think the whole of Australia went through the materials, most of the materials shortage, but certainly the isolated nature in regard to us at capacity.
And our supply chains.
Yeah, supply chains, but also labour, trades and everything has really impacted us. We're working through it now. Certainly, how do you get that coordinated approach into the future? How do you provide for a longer term view in regard to bringing on the apprentices and trades? And
let's not get caught again, essentially, like we have.
Yeah.
Let's segue into a term you spoke to me about before we went to air today, the housing continuum.
Yep.
What's Stockland doing to assist in providing alternative options to people other than ownership, renting or homelessness?
So the housing continuum for me, and it's one that this state government actually identified a number of years ago and is used. It's not used consistently across Australia, but certainly it's one that people are gravitating to federally now. But it's basically from homelessness, social housing, emergency housing, social housing, rental, shared equity, land lease is one that Stockland's into, but also straight into the private build-to-sell market. So it goes through the whole thing from apartments,
across all different options.
The whole bit. So I suppose the number one thing Stockland is doing, and I think the industry's becoming better at, is taking a holistic view of the housing continuum and making sure we understand what the supply is to each of those parts of the housing continuum. So yes, a lot of the government-supported supply at the, if you like, the bottom of the housing continuum is basically straight government spend with some community housing providers. Yeah, and some community housing providers get involved in social housing and managing it or managing their own book. But certainly moving up into the private, the built-to-sell. In between, there's the rental market, there's the build-to-rent, both vertical and horizontal. Stockland and a number of other players are doing land lease communities where we continue to own the land and sell the house on top of it, which produces a new more affordable price point.
We're going to see this in Western Australia?
Yeah, definitely. There's already examples in Western Australia, and I suppose you'll see more public companies like Stockland getting involved in it, probably to a 50+ type customer.
Like a lifestyle village.
Lifestyle village, good spend, good quality. There's a number of older ones around the place, but certainly from Stockland's perspective, it's providing good amenity, spending 10, 12 million on a central facility. It's a downgrader option. Normally the purchaser comes in with equity, having downsized from their home. And I looked at this at the census the other day in a presentation. Perth's got the most 4-bedroom product in Australia.
Yeah, no surprises there.
It's like 47% compared to, I think, the average at like high 20s. So there's people sitting on big houses
With empty bedrooms.
and we're underutilising the property that we have. We the community, are sitting on all this. We talk about housing crisis and everything else. How do we actually?
How do we optimise it? How do we utilise more of that roof space?
It's giving them options to move into, and also obviously the hurdle of stamp duty is a huge one.
So could we see a situation, and this might be a silly question, but Stockland provide a master planned community, and on the one street we've got 2 blocks of land that have been sold as blocks of land, a couple of blocks of land that have been sold as house and land packages, a build to rent, a land lease, all on the same street. Is that ever going to be possible to see that level of variety, or will they be more like villages or
I think
a lifestyle village?
It'll be more villages within a master plan community. I don't know about the same street, because it's a long street, but but what you just described, I think, is where we're heading. And I think the likes of Stockland, we're definitely looking at how we help the housing focus and right across the board, from apartments all the way through to shared equity, land lease communities, and obviously rental solutions as well, in addition to the build to sell stuff.
We're talking about Stockland as a business becoming much more involved in delivering outcomes than they have been before to solve these problems, and I guess your competitors as well. The last thing I would want to talk about, I guess, is educating the public about what it is that businesses like you guys do, and making it a little bit less demonised as, that big land developer or that big apartment developer. How do we get a little bit more cohesion between businesses that are as important as you guys and your end users, your end clients at the end of the day, and less transactional?
I actually even yesterday I heard it on the morning radio in regard. I can't remember what the topic was. It was about, the announcer said something, all those developers will come in and they'll grab as much profit as they can, And I thought, I just think we have to educate the community more, I think, in regard to the way it all comes together. We have to, both government and development and community, I think, have a responsibility to step back and have a bit of a balcony view of the way it all comes together. Through the UDA, we've actually initiating something that we think will work on a community level. We're trying to. We've never got there. We, developer, when we've got a project or whatever, we obviously, particularly in an infill location, we'll have a very project focus in regard to that particular community and how we advertise it,
how do you
get them
engage,
involved and everything else. How do we broadcast, if you like, better in regard to
how do we turn you into the good guys? At the end of the day, we don't have Perth without developers. You don't have housing supply. People won't be able to move here. People can't live here. I'm very proud of the fact that a part of my job is I provide either jobs or housing to my community. And on a much larger scale, Stockland does that too. I would have thought that businesses like Stockland would be revered for providing all these essential services. They are essential services, creating communities, owning shopping centres, all these things. Someone has to do it.
And don't forget the economic benefit of, I think in WA, there's 130,000 people employed in some way connected to property, directly connected to property. It's a huge part of our economy. A lot of people move with the population into the state, whether it be from overseas or locally. They get involved in property in some way. And I suppose it's educating that community. For me, a lot of it's about housing choice within existing communities is the one we have to overcome. How do we communicate that more relevant to the local community and understand it, where it all sits?
So where are we going to see Stockland moving into in the next 5-10 years? Where will we see your signs up? Obviously, you've got something coming up south of the river soon on an infill basis.
Yep.
One, can I get, I guess, a bit of a directional commitment from you that we're going to see more of these infill projects for starters? That's the plan, at least, from a company like Stockland. Two, where else are we going to see new communities popping up on the fringes?
Yeah, certainly we'll continue to focus the 5 parts of Perth in a planning sense, so the 4 diagonal corridors. We'll continue to offer both greenfield and also infill. We'll definitely be in the space in infill in the inner Perth, trying to develop, whether it be the built form choice or whether it be the solutions to housing that we mentioned before, we'll continue to develop those within those communities as well.
Col Dutton, GM of Stockland Residential in Western Australia, thank you so much for your time. Just like the other big hitters in WA, I know that this will be very well listened to, very well shared. Thank you for sharing your story, for sharing some solutions as well, and again, voicing some pretty similar concerns that a lot of the other big guys in Perth have been raising about how we can improve our system and deliver more supply in the areas that are needed to a state that is crying out for it. So thank you very much for your time, Colin, and look forward to having you on again sometime in the future.
Thanks, Trent.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Perth Property Show. If you've only just joined the conversation, you can catch up by heading over to our website, perthpropertyshow.com.au, subscribing to the podcast, or joining our Facebook page. Don't forget to tune in next Monday at 7 a.m. for more expert insights, local analysis, and suburb spotlights. Happy hunting!